morning, boys and girls. We're going to move on with our study of the ancient Roman civilization. We talked about the daily life in Rome, part 1, if you were a plebeian. But what would have happened if you were a patrician? So let's imagine that you're a child in a wealthy patrician family. Like most patricians, you live in a large house known in Italian as a domus. The domus has several stories with enough rooms for your large family. There's a mother, father, children, grandparents, dozens of slaves, and several aunts, uncles, and cousins. It is common to find the family gathered in the atrium, which is a large open space in the middle of the domus. An atrium features a skylight or a hole in the roof, which creates a bright atmosphere and helps air circulate through the house. If you look closely at the floor, you can see a shallow pool of water in the middle of the atrium. This pool is there to collect rainwater because there's no way to close the skylight. We have skylights today, usually have some type of window or plexiglass in them. You can open or close them. The little pool is also a good place to rinse your feet if they are dusty from the streets. Whether they were plebeians or patricians, all Roman families were organized in a similar way. While many families consisted only of parents and children, it was also very common to find many relatives living together in the same apartment building, if not the same house. Everyone, from grandparents to slaves, was considered to be part of the family. The oldest man in the family was called in Latin the paterfamilias, and he was in charge. By law, the paterfamilias had control over the family's property and money, and he made all the big family decisions. He might have arranged whom his children would marry before they were even adults. It really means, paterfamilias really means father of the family or household. Roman women were not allowed to vote or run for the Senate. Or even other offices. Women were expected to do whatever the paterfamilias told them to do. Nevertheless, Roman women did have some rights that women in many other civilizations did not have at the time. Roman women were allowed to own property, so there were many women involved in business. Roman women were usually deeply involved in important decisions in the home. Patrician women were often money lenders or landlords, meaning that they owned and managed properties in which others paid to live. Most plebeian women had their hands full with domestic duties, which included raising children, cooking, and cleaning. They may have also carried on a trade, such as selling food in the market. Wealthy plebeian and patrician women had slaves to do the work for them. Much of their time was spent managing their slaves. The richest families sometimes had hundreds of slaves to manage. Managing slaves usually involved telling them what jobs to do around the house and making sure that the job was done correctly. Were slaves allowed to pick the type of work that they did? No. Did slaves get paid? No. Patrician families and friends loved to gather for long, relaxing meals. They would sometimes eat for hours, nibbling at their food, drinking wine, and sharing all the latest stories they had heard around town. Rich patricians liked to recline on dining couches during meals. Sometimes they would lie on their stomachs. At least they didn't have to worry about spilling food on their laps if they did that. People often ate with their fingers, no need for a fork or spoon unless they were eating soup. On an average night, however, most plebeian families usually did not have time for long suppers. They probably sat around a table on stools, and their food usually wasn't very elaborate. A typical plebeian family would eat bread and porridge made from grain, along with small helpings of meat and whatever vegetables they had on hand. If you were dining with patrician or plebeians, you would follow their custom on how to eat. And what saying that you have learned applies to this? If you follow along the customs of the people that you are with? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. These look like patricians, sort of laying around, having a leisurely meal. Dog under the table to pick up crumbs. Does that ever happen at your house? Olive oil was an important part of many meals. Romans used olive oil for cooking and spreading on foods. They loved it so much that sometimes they drank it by the glass. Bread was the most popular and common food in Rome. There were bakeries all over the city selling all sorts of breads and sweet pastries. Romans liked to spread olive oil, honey, or cheese on their bread. Romans also ate lots of fish and oysters, as well as all kinds of vegetables. Local fishermen brought fresh fish to the Roman marketplaces every day. They did not have refrigerators back then, so nearly everything had to be eaten fresh. Well, as you've heard, the ancient Greeks also used olive oil in their everyday lives. Olive oil was and still is today often used in cooking, as well as medicine, oil used for lamps, and in soap. Why do you think that the Romans ate a lot of seafood? Think about what their country looks like. It's a peninsula that sticks out into that's right, the Mediterranean Sea. Rome is also built on the Tiber River. Okay. As the population living in Rome grew, the city became more and more crowded. Although plebeians had opportunities to make money and own property, life was not easy for most of them. Because Rome relied so much on grain shipments being imported from across the sea, like from Carthage and Egypt, sometimes there was a food shortage. A shortage is when there is not enough of something that is needed. It's the opposite of words that you've heard earlier, like bounty and surplus. Bounty and surplus means you have more than what you need. A shortage means you do not have what you need. War and bad weather sometimes delayed those food shipments from arriving at the wharves, and Rome would suddenly become an angry city of thousands of hungry people. Disease was a big problem too. Romans worked hard to keep the city clean, but it was an impossible situation with so many people. As a result, horrible diseases sometimes spread throughout the population. The life of patricians might have seemed easy compared to the lives of plebeians and slaves, but that doesn't mean that patricians didn't have worries. Patricians were the wealthy elite in Roman society, but there were not as many of them as there were plebeians. As time passed, the ordinary people of Rome, or the mob, as the patricians called them, began to understand that they had power in their numbers. A mob is a large group of people who gather together to protest something. What does it mean to have power in numbers? A lot of people on your side if you have power in numbers. Riots became common. People would rampage through the city, burning and trashing buildings, and generally creating chaos. People rioted most often when there were food shortages. Not surprisingly, this always made the patricians very nervous. The patricians always had plenty of food, and the plebeians knew it. The patricians valued their high position in society and felt threatened that the protests of the many plebeians could eventually change their status. So the wealthy Romans came up with a plan that is sometimes called bread and circuses. The idea was basically to distract people from their problems by staging amazing spectacles. This was part of the reason why buildings like the Circus Maximus and the Colosseum were built. Just when the mobs were starting to get restless and wanting to start a riot, the Senate and other patricians would pay for a couple of weeks of games to distract unhappy citizens. Usually the games involved chariot races, fights among people and animals, and circus tricks involving trained animals, acrobats, jugglers, and other entertainers. If you've ever been to a circus under a big top tent, you can thank the Romans because they were one of the first to do it. Of course, our circuses are far tamer than the Roman circuses. Instead of having a lion jump through a hoop, they had lions fighting people. Men who fought against animals such as lions were called venatores. The ultimate spectacles took place in the great amphitheater you have heard about called the Colosseum. Here, gladiators would fight each other for the public's entertainment. Gladiators were often criminals or soldiers that had been captured from enemy armies. Though rare, there were also women fighters called gladiatrices. Believe it or not, some people chose the life of a gladiator for the fame. Gladiators were sometimes forced to fight each other to the death in front of thousands of people. Many gladiators did not live very long. One appearance in the arena was all they got. Roman games were not for the faint of heart. That means if you are faint of heart, you're sensitive, afraid, or easily upset. I would not have watched gladiator games. I would have been faint of heart. Think about life in Rome from a Roman's perspective. They lived in an incredible city, and they had all kinds of opportunities. But life was still very hard. War, disease, and hunger were always life's obstacles. Medicines and medical care, such as we know today, did not exist in ancient Rome. The Roman legions marched all over the world with countless Roman soldiers never to be seen or heard from again. At any moment, a foreign army could invade Roman homes, carrying citizens away to a life of slavery. Life for most people during Roman times was short and brutal. They loved their families, but many Romans did not really expect to live a very long life. For all their inventions and immense power, the Romans could not change the fact that their lives were uncertain and dangerous. Some Romans, therefore, did not feel sorry to see a person thrown into an arena to fight a lion. Perhaps some of them thought, too bad for him, but that could be me tomorrow. You have heard in previous read-alouds that plebeians lived in crowded and noisy apartments, which did not have kitchens because people feared that they would start fires. What about the home or domus of a patrician? What was it like? Well, they were large homes that fit many family members, including slaves. They had atriums with skylights. They were bright. They may have had shallow pools of water in them. Everybody lived under one roof. You heard that the Latin phrase pater familias means the father of the family or the head of the household. What did this role mean? That question is asking, what was the job of the pater familias? Well, the oldest man in the home was in charge of the family, and he had control over the property, money, and all other family decisions. What kind of rights did Roman women have? Well, they were citizens of Rome, They could own property. They could own businesses. They could lend money, be landlords, which means they could own apartments, manage the apartments. They could manage slaves. What rights did Roman women not have? Well, even though they were citizens, they could not become senators or consuls, and they could not vote. How was this different from women's rights in ancient Greek? Well, women in ancient Greece could not vote either, but they were not allowed to own property or businesses in ancient Greece. So compare and contrast a patrician dinner and a plebeian dinner. Compare means you tell something that is the same about them. So you might hear words like same or both of these have. Contrast, you might hear the word different or something along that line. Patricians often reclined while eating, using their fingers to eat their food, and their leisurely meal could last a long time. Whereas plebeians often sat on stools. They ate simpler foods like bread and porridge with small helpings of meat and vegetables, and they did not take as much time to eat and relax. Describe why life in ancient Rome could be brutal at times. Well, there was disease. The streets were crowded and busy. They tried to keep Rome clean, but there were so many people, it was very difficult. Sometimes there were shortages of food. Mobs of people would riot and create chaos. Gladiators would sometimes fight to the death. Some men would fight animals. Foreign armies might invade at any time. There was always war looming, and medicine and medical care was not as good as it is today. When you hear about chaos, in this sentence, people would rampage through the city, burning and trashing buildings and generally creating chaos. The word chaos is a state of complete confusion and disorganization. So chaos is sort of the opposite of civilization. Civilization, we think of how people are living together in an ordered manner. Chaos would be the opposite of that. That would be disorder and confusion. All right. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a good rest of your day.